Hello, good evening, welcome everybody. My name is Lucy Gradnock. I'm Dean of Research here at the Courtauld Institute of Art, and it's my huge pleasure to welcome you to tonight's professorial lecture delivered by Dorothy Price, Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art and Critical Race Art History. Tonight's lecture is the fourth in this distinguished series, and it's been such a treat over the course of this series to come together to celebrate and to learn from our senior colleagues who are real leaders in their fields and people who shape the discipline through their research and practice. Dot's work has been pioneering in foregrounding Black histories and voices, making visible the work of Black artists. And she's done this in her scholarship, in her editorial work, in her curating, including last autumn in bringing the work of Claudette Johnson to the Courtauld Gallery, and currently, of course, in the Royal Academy's Untangling Pasts exhibition, which seeks to uncover and interrogate the Academy's entanglement in colonial histories. And I hope that you'll indulge me in a little personal reflection when I say that Dot has not only been a very treasured colleague and friend to me, but also an inspiration and a mentor as my predecessor in the role of editor of the journal Art History, in which capacity she co-edited the landmark Decolonising Art History questionnaire. And really, typically, for Dot, I think, that work both defined the very urgent questions facing our discipline and also served as a call to action, inviting us all to reflect on our position and the uses to which we put our collective scholarly voice. And so it feels wonderful that we are here as a collective to listen to Dot. In just a moment, I'm going to hand over to another incredibly inspiring speaker and longtime friend of the Courtauld, Dr. Sarah Turner, director of the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art. And Sarah will be more fully introducing Dot and her work. And our huge thanks to Sarah for joining us this evening in that capacity. As is the tradition with these professorial lectures, we won't have formal questions and answers afterwards. But following Dot's lecture, we'll adjourn for drinks upstairs to a more convivial space in the Courtauld Common Room to continue those celebrations and our discussions more informally. But now, without further ado, please welcome Sarah Turner.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It is with the greatest of pleasure that I'm here to introduce Professor Dorothy Price's lecture tonight. This room, packed and buzzing with warmth, laughter, collegiality and friendship, is testament to the kind of person and scholar that Dot is. Dot is a world shaper, a place changer, a people connector, a history maker, and I thought if you can't go for it in an inaugural introduction, when can you? That is why we are all here. In different ways, Dot has made an impact on us through her teaching, and it's great to see lots of current and previous students here in the audience, her writing, her curating, her editing, and her ability to bring together people, art, and ideas in ways that are always surprising and thought-provoking. Dot's work is genuinely boundary crossing, but it's also bridge-making. She's equally at home writing about German modernism in the early 20th century, which is the subject of her two monographs, as she is with engaging about the histories of the British Empire or writing about contemporary art practice. She wrote her PhD on representations of sexuality in the city in Imperial and Weimar Germany, which was funded by the British Academy under Professor Maggie Iverson, and I saw Maggie earlier. Hi, Maggie. At the University of Essex, finished in 1997, and has since then forged a career that has spanned both academia and museums. What really stands out for me are the ways in which Dot shares her work with others, through academic publications, exhibition making, editorial work, writing for magazines and websites, her social media presence, and contributions to podcasts and public discussions. We are all here because we are beneficiaries of her knowledge and her generosity. In the space of just a few years, Dot has had a profound impact on the Courtauld Institute of Art. She joined in September 2021 from the University of Bristol, And in that same year, she was also elected a Fellow of the British Academy. At Bristol, she was Professorial Research Lead for the Transnational Modernisms Research Centre and a founder member and inaugural director of the Centre for Black Humanities. She was the first woman of colour to be appointed to a chair in art history at a Russell Group university. As Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art and Critical Race at Art History at the Courtauld, her impact on the institution is already deeply felt. Her MA course is shaping the next generation of researchers and cultural leaders, along with PhD students and the BA students she teaches as well, who are thinking deeply about topics such as the Black Atlantic, Afro-modernity, the civil rights and Black power movements, and Black presence. All this work, I think, radically rethinks what we might call the art history and method. We all know that one, art history and race, modernism and Black artists. But instead, Dot's methodology as an educator, but I think it's something that runs throughout her work, is to really think about studying the past in order to dream of a different future. Along with the deep ethics and difficulties of confronting the racism that has structured art history and the art world, Dot also provides her students and all of us with different pathways forward, with the hope of possibility and potential for change. To borrow a title from one of Lubena Himid's series of works, dreaming has a share in history. That emphasis on dreaming, on imagination and on creativity, combined with sustained and careful attention to the material qualities of the work of art, is a hallmark of Dot's work. And I think that's why artists particularly admire her reflections on their practice. And I think it's also notable that she's worked with a number of contemporary artists, and her support of women practitioners is also particularly striking. Chantal Joff, Veronica Ryan, Sonia Boyce, Lubena Himid, and Claudette Johnson are just a handful of the artists that she's written about and collaborated with. And there's also a deep commitment as well to researching and making visible the lives and work of historic women artists, as recently articulated in her major exhibition, Making Modernism, Paula Modersohn-Becker, Katie Kolovitz, Gabriella Munter, and Marianne Verkin at the Royal Academy in 2022. For Dot, research, curatorial work and exhibition making go hand in hand with a reimagination of art's histories. And I think the exhibition has become a particularly important medium for Dot, a place in which to put the pressure on in a very public way, and boy does she put the pressure on. Nowhere is that more apparently felt in the brilliant and brave, entangled pasts, art, colonialism and change, currently at the Royal Academy. And change, there's that word again. From the moment you step off Piccadilly into the courtyard of Burlington House and encounter Tavares Strachan's The First Supper, you know that that exhibition means business. There's much to say and to celebrate about Dot's work, and I know that you've all come to listen to her and not me, so I just want to offer a couple of short vignettes that for me personally highlight Dot's contribution. And as Lucy mentioned, I think the first is her recent editorship of the journal Art History from 2018 to 2022, and how that 5-year tenure has irrevocably changed the publication, and as a result, the field and community it serves. Although there's still much work to be done in diversifying the people and perspectives of art history, so much has changed in our field, and looking at the issues of the journal during the period of her editorship really documents the need for some pretty difficult and uncomfortable conversations, alongside a proactive desire to make a tangible difference. And I think, again, Lucy, you mentioned some of these, but the stewardship and contribution to 3 special issues, Rethinking British Art, and co-edited with Professor Sonia Boyce, Weimar's Others, and British Art and the Global, as well as that round table, Decolonising Art History, coordinated with board member and now fellow Courtauld colleague Catherine Grant, are all examples, to borrow a phrase from one of Dot's editorials, of strategy in action. I love that phrase. And she's most definitely a woman of action. She has that wonderful and rare gift of being a talker and a doer. And I have this really wonderful and slightly surreal memory of talking with you, Dot, way into the night, in an Austin Powers themed hotel bar in Brighton at the Art History Conference in 2019, really putting the world to rights. But those of you who've worked with Dot will all recognise that superpower of hers to do some profoundly serious stuff and have a whole lot of fun at the same time. And another moment struck me quite powerfully, which was quite recently. It was a very hot September evening at the opening of the exhibition Claudette Johnson Presence at the Courtauld Gallery. And it was amazing as Claudette and Dot were stood together in front of Manet's bar at the Folies Bergère. It was, they told us, the first monographic show of Claudette Johnson's work at a major public gallery in London, and also the first exhibition by a black woman, a black artist at the Courtauld Gallery. Manet's barmaid took on a different role that night. She was not there just serving the drinks, but was witnessing history being made. Dot's work is often about those thorny questions of visibility and absence, and of presence, of who gets to be seen, to be represented, written about, and of who gets to do the seeing and the writing. And I know tonight's lecture, Making Choices, will pick up on these themes, as will her current book project, which is entitled For Opacity, A Visual Poetics of Black British Art. Dot, I know everyone here will join me not only in congratulating you on this wonderful occasion of giving an inaugural professorial lecture at the Courtauld, but also in thanking you for your scholarship, your leadership, and your friendship. Let's now welcome Professor Dorothy Price to the podium.
Thank you, Sarah. Gosh, lots to live up to there. And thank you, all of you, for coming out tonight as well to hear my thoughts on, well, things I've been thinking about. Okay. Making choices. According to Dr. Eva Krokov, a lecturer in psychology at the University of Leicester, whose research is concerned with understanding some of the core principles underlying general decision-making, our brains are required to make up to 35,000 decisions a day. And yet, such frenetic human activity is often belied by the stillness that visual art brings to the shared dilemmas of making choices. Those leaps of faith whose consequences we may not yet be able to fully appreciate or understand, but which we have to commit to one way or another. Like what to focus on my lecture for this evening, for example, what to wear, when to arrive, how to get here. Yet unlike Angelica Kaufmann, self-portrayed here in 1794, choosing between whether to become a musician or a painter, most of us probably don't think to immortalise such choices in our own lives, as we carry on with the business of making decisions and grinning or bearing no consequences. Within the history and present of global conflicts, amongst the countless disastrous political and aesthetic choices made by power-hungry regimes intent on wiping out those for whom they have chilling disregard, many human choices stand out as unfailingly brave, bold, or tragic by turns. Walter Benjamin's decision, if it was that, to end his own life on the 26th of September 1940, remains an ineffable tragedy. As Hannah Arendt tells it, there were various reasons that Benjamin made that choice. She notes that, quote, the Gestapo had confiscated his Paris apartment, which contained his library, and she asks, how was he to live without a library? How could he earn a living? Besides, nothing drew him to America, which is where, like many of his intellectual contemporaries, he was slated to go. But, she continues, the immediate occasion for Benjamin's suicide was an uncommon stroke of bad luck. As she proceeds to outline a series of reasons for his tragic death, ones that build up an exhausting picture of trials and tribulations, misfortune and tragic timing, including the exhausting journey by foot across the Pyrenees with a heart condition that, quote, rendered even the shortest walk a great exertion. The lack of a French exit visa and the sudden closure of the Spanish border, through which he and his companions were to escape. As Arendt comments, one day earlier, Benjamin would have got through without any trouble. One day later, and the people in Marseille would have known that for the time being it was impossible to pass through Spain. Only on that particular day was the catastrophe possible. A tragic decision indeed then, to have chosen the 25th of September 1940 to travel. And this is a photograph by German photographer Giselle Freund of Benjamin in the Bibliothèque Nationale. As is by now well rehearsed, earlier on in the spring of that same tragic year, 1940, Benjamin had written what transpired to have been his last essay, Thesis on the Philosophy of History, which remains one of his most enduring and effective pieces of writing. As a left-wing German Jewish intellectual, his intimate and peculiar vantage point over the unfolding terror of fascism in Europe is in part what lends the essay its continued oratic quality. That and the vivid poetics in which his understanding of history, as distinct from the past, is so poignantly imagined. For art historians especially, one of the abiding vignettes in the essay is Benjamin's description of the 1920 oil transfer drawing watercolour Angelus Novus, an artwork then in Benjamin's collection and bought directly from his friend Paul Klee in 1921, before being deposited with Georges Bataille in 1940 for safekeeping in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Indeed, were Benjamin still alive as the war unfolded, the irony of the subsequent historiography of the painting's provenance would likely not have been lost on him in the wake of his death, as has been explored in some devastating detail by John Collins in a 2006 article, From Port Boo to Palestine and Back. And Port Boo is where Benjamin took his own life. As Collins notes, the watercolour found its way into Theodore Adorno's hands in New York for a time before moving to its current home, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. The angel of history, in other words, now finds itself staring from one side into the abyss on the other, of yet another state of emergency. In Benjamin's essay, Klee's ghostly oil transfer becomes a cipher for a richly symbolic evocation of history, whose eyes are staring, mouth open, wings spread, but whose face is turned towards the past. And as Benjamin says, where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. Yet Benjamin's angel is unable to stay. It is propelled instead by the storm of progress. Progress as regress, which leaves it blind to the future and unable to navigate, an apt metaphor for the humanitarian crises that we are unbearably witness to on a daily basis. The reason I dwell on Benjamin is that about a year ago I was asked by Quashie to contribute a catalogue essay for his exhibition, The Time Is Always Now, Artists Reframe the Black Figure, currently on show at the National Portrait Gallery. I was asked in particular to focus on the interplay between history and presence in the work of a number of artists, including Lubena Himid, Barbara Walker, and others. For me, it was Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history that remained a potent starting place for a meditation on what David Joslet has referred to as the structural futurity of artworks as time batteries, simultaneously inhabiting past, present, and potential futures, and thus closely allied to the premise of Eschen's exhibition and Benjamin's constellations. What I asked myself then was, but what if the angel had stayed and had not been blown off course? And that perhaps it is not too implausible to imagine that the artists included in the exhibition may, in one way or another, have inherited the angel's mantle as they continue to activate potential histories in our collective unlearning of imperialism. Each offer different ways of rethinking the past through a process of visual repair, something that Barbara Walker has referred to in relation to her interest in archives as, quote, playing in the unknown. Walker's powerful artistic practice includes paintings, temporary large-scale wall drawings, and embossed paper drawings, all of which centralise black figures. Her keen historical eye has roamed from the global ripples of black soldiers serving in the First and Second World Wars to intimate portrayals of her adult son caught up in the structural and epistemic violence of police racism in Britain. But it has also taken to task the historically white-centric canon of her and our own profession. Vanishing Point, a series of graphite drawings on blind embossed paper begun in 2018, compels us to refocus our attention on hitherto largely marginalised black figures, men, women and children, who people the history of Western art, mostly as attendants, servants and the enslaved, sometimes as adoring magi, but always on the edge of the action. Walker invites us to look again at canonical artworks in British and European national public collections by traditionally categorised Old Master artists, Paolo Veronese, Johann Liss, Anthony van Dyck, Titian, Daniel Meutens, Placido Cotanzi, Wilhelm Cornelius, Doister, Geertken Totzinians, Pierre Mignard, Albert Coit, Hendrik Herschkop, Bartolomeo Spanger and others, all painters whom in one way or another have been associated with national schools, the Italian Baroque, the Flemish school, the Dutch Golden Age, the French school, etc. One of the many accomplishments of Walker's Vanishing Point is a deceptively simple redirection of our gaze, and with that, the complete unravelling of Eurocentric art history. The work is a provocation to reflect on who and who has not been properly attended to within constructions of art historical nationhood that still hang on the walls of our cultural institutions today. Whilst visibly holding to account the racialised hierarchies of historical painting, Walker is also interrogating the taxonomies of medium, the very materials that have legitimised academic training for artists since the Renaissance. As she observes, drawing is practical, accessible and fast compared with painting, which takes a lot of unpacking. It can be a bit cumbersome. I'm arguing a point about drawing and celebrating it. It's not secondary to painting, as some might think, and that's true of these individuals too. Similarly, within printmaking, embossing hasn't been fashionable for some years. It sits on the periphery, but I'm bringing it in as a language. Embossing is a type of drawing in itself, the ghostly imprint. Again, the subject and the material, they sit side by side in my work. They're having a conversation. The polyvocal richness of Walker's historically oriented practice centres on making visible the dynamics of racialised and gendered power in art's histories. Aristocratic slave owners are made into ghostly imprints, whilst the African people, often children, whom they have enslaved, become the main focus, no longer obscured in dark corners, backs turned, bodies twisted, faces hidden, but intimately rendered through detailed observation and brought back from archival occlusion. We may not have their names nor any details of their lives, but we know they existed, and for Walker, like many of the artists included in The Time Is Always Now, she brings them back into our view, and indeed into our purview. Another artist also represented in The Time Is Always Now, for whom, as she has often said, everything begins with drawing, is Claudette Johnson. And yes, of course, I'm going to talk about Claudette. How could I not? A first encounter with Johnson's mesmerising, often larger-than-life depictions of an array of people posed alone or in pairs asks us to stand with them a while, to enjoy their monumental presence, to let our eyes wander across the folds of their skin, drink in the rich colours of their clothes or backgrounds, smile back at their self-assurance. The sitters range from family members to close personal friends, to significant historical figures taken from photographs and found images, drawn and painted from variable combinations of life and imagination. There's no distinction made in these magnificent works between the living and the dead, the known and the not known, the personal and the historical. Each subject is rendered on equal terms. Although always images of people, none of them are portraits in the ways externally demanded or expected of them. As Johnson has remarked, what's more important is whether there's energy and life and presence in the work, not who it's of. Defying expectations is perhaps a hallmark of her career as an artist, a refusal to be hemmed in by other people's assumptions, acting against the grain and being true to her own choices. The history of Western art is beleaguered with slippages between the sign and the signified, between what we see and how it is interpreted, between what is shown and what is understood. Its traditions of portraiture are perhaps the most exemplary of a type of complex ontological relationship that presumes that what one sees is necessarily tied to a known individual, although its potential meanings have never been straightforward, ranging as they do from political propaganda, think Elizabeth I to the Armada portrait, 1588, regal aggrandizement, perhaps Velasquez, King Philip IV of Spain, to declarations of love, Rossetti's Beata Beatrix, and much in between. And yet even in the most canonical of historical portraits, it is not incumbent on us to know who the sitters are in order to appreciate their painterly form. And it's this prospect that allows us, I think, to think Johnson's paintings otherwise, and this is Reynolds' beautiful head of a man currently on show in Entangled Pasts. Perhaps one could even suggest that it is the tenets of modernist abstraction that provide more fertile ground for our looking than do the typical conventions of portraiture. As a mode of painting, abstraction, though initially rooted in the natural world, belongs to the domain of invention, existing on its own pictorial and material terms, and in thrall to no external referent. Johnson's paintings disavow concrete anchors. Time and place are left out of the frame in favour of black presence as materialised through manipulations of light and dark, colour and form, tonality and shade, material and surface, flatness and texture. Attention is paid in and to the realm of the visual. Within canonical histories of portraiture, black presence, black subjectivity, and black agency have been overlooked, marginalised, dehumanised, or at best ignored. Strategies for redress within recent art practices by a number of artists have included work that positions the self in relation to history in order to raise questions about visibility and absence. Work that refocuses the existence of black presence within Western portraits as poignant moments of pause and reflection. Insertions of black agency within existing Western canons of historical representation, and perhaps most relevant in relation to Claudette Johnson, the short-circuiting of traditional conventions of portraiture altogether in a new evocation of blackness and being. And it's just quickly worth pointing out before I move on that this work by Titus Kaffar, called Shifting the Gaze, was created live on stage as part of a dramatic finale to a TED talk he gave in 2017, where he decided to pick up a large paintbrush and obliterate the white figures in his copy of a 17th century family portrait, loosely based on a Frans Hals, thus leaving only the black figure in the centre of the composition visible, an act of choice in redirecting the audience's gaze towards looking at the overlooked, to reinvent a phrase from Norman Bryson. Yet as Zadie Smith has commented in the context of thinking about Lynette Yadamboache, but which could equally be applicable to Johnson, black selfhood has always existed and is not invisible to black people. The idea of making black presence visible is questioned by Smith. Visible for whom? And in his thinking through what it means to articulate an aesthetics of aliveness, Kevin Quashie observes that it is only anti-Blackness that deems black subjectivity invisible. So it becomes an urgent priority to, quote, displace anti-Blackness from the centre of one's thinking, a choice we can all make. As he explains, though I don't deny the terribleness of the world we live in, nor its anti-black perpetuity, I'm interested in conceptualising an aesthetic imaginary founded on black worldness. Black worldness, I would suggest, what resides at the heart of Johnson's monumental canvases of human intimacy. These are works about presence and aliveness, even in and after death. Friends in Pink plus Yellow on Cobalt, painted in 2023, for example, remains testament to a poetics of relation, to borrow from Glisson, in which a primary interest is the closeness between the sitters. Inspired by a grainy photograph of the former president of Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, smiling fondly in friendship at Fela Kuti in 1987, shortly before Sankara was murdered a few weeks later. The image was reposted on social media in 2022 by Nigerian-born fashion designer Duro Olowu in celebration of the political and cultural achievements of both men. In Johnson's hands, their celebrity is secondary to a study of the intimacy of their bodies, bound in close friendship and relayed in exquisite formal tension between the pastel pink and yellow of their clothes and the bold primary colours of their cobalt and green backdrop. They move quietly from sign to scene. At the upper right edge, a flash of red paint leads our eye diagonally downwards towards the artist's signature, also delineated in red, a subtle but perfect pictorial harmony. In his 2019 book, Frottage, Frictions of Intimacy Across the Black Diaspora, Kenyan author Kiguru Makaria re-theorises an understanding of frottage as removed from its high modernist art historical lineage in the work of Max Ernst to something altogether entirely different. In setting out his stall, he comments, "I use frottage, a relation of proximity, to figure the black diaspora, for doing so unsettles the heteronormative tropes through which the black diaspora has been imagined and idealised." The artist Max Ernst is formally credited with the process of inventing frottage, which consists of laying paper over a surface and using charcoal or pencil to rub over the paper to reveal the traces that history has left on that surface. Frottage, in Macaria's terms, does not provide a complete narrative or even signal where the researcher should look. At best, its traces demonstrate that someone or something has passed through a space and left some kind of evidence. And he continues, the evidence frottage provides creates the grounds for speculation and takes seriously the work speculation does in enlarging our apprehension of the world and our possibilities for being in the world. For Macaria, the black diaspora understood as frottage is, quote, affective and bodily proximity. Lingering over the affection displayed in the gentle shoulder-to-shoulder contact between the protagonists in Johnson's Friends in Pink and Yellow on Cobalt, one can't help noticing just how immersed Johnson is in her craft. Both sitters' hands and Sankara's striking forearm are overlaid with a sweep of pale blue pastel, accented in the slightest of white highlights. It's a technique that recalls the haptic sensuality of Toulouse-Lautrec's violent colour contrasts in the many oils and pastels he made to convey the vibrant metropolitan nightlife of fin de siècle Parisian demi-monde well over a century ago. Johnson's recourse to art histories is evident in the books and references in her studio, illustrated studies of Lautrec, Chagall, Goya, and other canonical artists of Western art history, interspersed with Ladislas Segi's comprehensively illustrated 1969 study of African sculpture. The lively movement of the dancer, Lagulu's flamboyant skirt, a detail shown here from Lautrec's dance at the Moulin Rouge, Lagulu and Valentin of 1895, from the Musée d'Orsay, is secured by his application of striped flashes of blue pastel with accents of white. In Friends in Pink plus Yellow on Cobalt, Lautrec's technical flourish is understood by Johnson and boldly transposed onto the quiet beauty of Sankara and Fela's skin, the mark of an artist absolutely in control of her art. Combined with her engagement with painting and its histories, Johnson's work has also been consistently inspired by the black feminisms of which she was a leading proponent within the Black British arts movement since its emergence in the 1980s. Informed by the writings of Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, and other black feminists, Johnson has consistently chosen to give space to black women's presence, a presence, as she recalls, which has been distorted, hidden, or denied within canonical histories of Western art. Indeed, as a viewer, visually tracing the lines of Johnson's self-study across the heft of the Cardi paper onto which it's metaphorically hewn from oil pastel like a monument to self-presence, one is held steadfastly in the orbit of the artist's gaze, staking a claim, asserting existence, being present. Colour is muted in this work as Johnson focuses on form, mapping the contours of her own face in oil pastels, sepia tones muted, paper warm. Like so many of her works, there's a deliberate disregard for the boundaries of the page, for any necessity to stay within it. Self-study enters stage left, meets us with interested reserve, and is barely contained by the boundaries of the paper. In the exclusion of any of the customary props of artistic self-portraiture, no easel, no paints, no half-begun canvas, Johnson asserts the status of the work as a study, not a self-portrait, a crucial distinction. In a deft pictorial manoeuvre, her face becomes a source material for a magnificent drawing that disavows egotism while still signalling an important taking up of space by black female presence. In an interview for the New York Times last year, Johnson was asked to declare her favourite artwork by someone else, to which she responded Rembrandt's Young Woman Sleeping of 1654. It does everything I want my drawings to do. In her London studio, she keeps a postcard of it above her desk. Perhaps one of the most surprising aspects of this comparison is scale. The Rembrandt is a relatively small 24 centimetres by 20.3 centimetres in size, whilst many of Johnson's recent works have tended to reach heights of well over 1.5 metres. But scale here isn't the point. Rather, I think it is about the emotional depth of human connection that Rembrandt conveys in such a deceptively simple sketch and with the most minimal of means. Rembrandt's drawing offers the viewer multiple registers of empathic relation. The young woman's pose seems anything but restful. Her body is twisted into an awkwardly frontal position, its weight resting on her knees, whilst her torso adjusts to its pressure in an almost imperceptible twist. She wraps her left arm around her for support, and presumably also want of knowing where else it should fall, whilst her right arm is raised onto a bolster at an awkwardly uncomfortable angle and bent into a makeshift pillow. Yet despite these palpable bodily twists and turns, we're nevertheless seduced by the illusion of her slumber. Although with hindsight we know that the model is most likely Rembrandt's beloved wife Henrika Stoffels, such information seems only secondary to his pictorial concerns. This is no love poem to a fleeting moment caught by a lover's gaze, but a carefully constructed studio pose that enables the artist to test his dexterity. Like a Golden Age Pygmalion, Rembrandt's trio of materials have calligraphically matriculated a young woman into being. It's the alchemical material relationships between line and space to reveal form that are echoed in Johnson's works such as Self-Study and Study for Painting, both works of 2022. In Self-Study, Johnson exchanges the brown wash of Rembrandt's 17th century palette for the burnt umber of a 21st century oil pastel. But the manipulation of line for the materialization of form remain shared preoccupations across 4 centuries that separate the artists from one another. During a visit to her London studio in January last year, our conversation with Johnson turned inevitably towards her medium: oil stick, soft pastel, gouache, watercolour, ready-made egg tempera, the relative merits of Sennelier over Rembrandt pastels, and what they allow for in her practice. She commented that, quote, "The reason that I use pastels is the speed at which you can work relatively quickly if you can get a very strong image with just a few marks from the pastels. So often people see a work and they think it's charcoal, but it's not. It's pastel. And so it's different. You don't get depth of colour with charcoal. And indeed, depth of colour is a recurring and striking feature of many of Johnson's recent works. Friends in Green and Red on Yellow, for example, revisits the yellow ground of a slightly earlier painting, Reunion of 2021, which celebrates the joyful and emotional meeting of Johnson's mother and grandmother in Jamaica in 1992, after almost 30 years apart. As Johnson has commented of this work in conversation with fellow artist and friend John Aconfra, I went to Jamaica for the first time in 1992 and met my grandmother for the first time. When I went with my mother to Jamaica that year, it was the first time that she'd seen her mother for about 30 years. So this was their reunion, seeing my mother like a child with her mother. They were just laughing in a way that almost like she was tickling her, like a mother tickles a baby. So it was revelatory for me to see them together. I took this very small snapshot from that I've had in the studio for years, and had always liked what it said about that moment when they met. This seemed to me the time to try and do something with it, to try and give it space. Both women in the painting are shown smiling and laughing so much that their eyes are closed, living in the moment, and unusually in Johnson's oeuvre, only existing in each other's company. We, the viewer, are relegated, rightfully disregarded, from this matrilineal reconnection. Every inch of the paper is marked by Johnson in rich hues, from the gold of the backdrop to the blue of her mother's dress and the pattern of her grandmother's. Within Johnson's oeuvre, and indeed within the history of art more widely, this is an unusual and outstanding celebration of black women's joy writ large. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Reunion also proved to be a catalyst for a number of subsequent compositions and variations by Johnson. In Friends in Cobalt and Black, for example, the firm intertwining of the arms of Reunion's protagonists are transposed into a more tentative sense of touch between friends who nevertheless steadfastly gaze at each other. We are again surplus to requirements, their comportment marked by the vibrant cobalt and the rich, almost blue-black of their respective clothes, which occupy a sizable portion of the work. In Friends in Green and Red on Yellow of 2023, the same joyful golden background that synesthetically underscores the emotional warmth of Reunion is reprised. Here it serves as a glowing foil to the beauty of the friends' luxuriously coloured emerald and ruby t-shirts. The three colours combined in this work sparkle in their unconscious nod to Pan-Africanism. The interiority of the intimacy or frottage that is shared so privately between the black women of Reunion and Friends in Cobalt and Black has shifted in Friends in Green and Red on Yellow. Whilst the young man in red, his chin resting on his hand, looks thoughtfully out into the middle distance, the gentlest hint of a smile revealing his self-possession and the enjoyment in his own being. The figure in green, shoulders back, palpably relaxed in the company of his friend, nevertheless looks at us with the gentlest hint of curiosity. We cannot help but be drawn in by Johnson's strategic choices to foreground joyful intimacy within her reinventions of black figuration for a new canon of art history. For the last 10 minutes or so, the remainder of this lecture, I've chosen to conclude with the consideration of a few works by Lubena Himid. Her painterly address to History in Le Rodeur of 2016, which is currently also on show in The Time Is Always Now at the MPG. But first, also her body of 10 new works made in 2023, known as her strategy paintings, and currently on view as part of her solo exhibition, Make, Do and Mend, at the Jones Centre, the Contemporary Austin, on the occasion of her being awarded the 2024 Suzanne Dill Booth and Flag Foundation Art Prize. The exhibition opened a few weeks ago in Texas, and I just want to quickly show you some of the installation shots of it and the works themselves with Lubena's gloss on them, before I dwell in more detail on one particularly poignant example. And I have to thank Beth Hughes, who's here tonight, for supplying me with images and help. Thank you, Beth. Each of the works in the series depict fictional men and women, mainly seated around tables, contemplating and discussing various assortments of organic, mechanical, obscure, or everyday objects in front of them. Each work imagines the act of attempting to solve a problem and the concomitant tensions that inheres to most acts of collective decision-making. As Hamid comments, in all of the paintings, people are battling not to be in control and succeeding and failing all of the time. If you take control, all that happens is someone wins and someone loses. But if you try to let go, you listen to other opinions. And just very quickly, some installation shots of the exhibition, because it's in Texas and I don't know how many people are going to get to see it there. And part of the exhibition, she had a table made so that actually people could use the table and sit around it for meetings, book clubs, whatever it is that people wanted to use the space for. And this is kind of genius positioning, I think, of the table. Doing things together is useful, talking often helps, listening can be pleasurable, try to have a strategy. Pointless heroism, according to Lubena, is about trying to work out how to lead without unnecessary risk to life and well-being, while gyroscopic motion is about how to understand balance, order and power sharing, and whether the Earth's movement can teach us anything. In archival manoeuvres, Hamid asks, can we use old-fashioned make-do and mend methods to figure out how to plan for sustainability? And in cosmic dentistry, painted just after she'd had some really painful dental treatment, she asks how much pain can be endured and how much pain must be hidden from others. In Flora Britannica, the question becomes, when is care poisonous? How can we tell the difference between public gesture and real love? The plants, flowers and seeds on the table are all British, many identifiable: hemlock, primrose, elderflower, speedwell, water dropwort, umbellifer, and all poisonous. They become metaphors for the question Lubena raises about care. When is care poisonous? While surprise navigation is concerned with the skill and perseverance needed to use unusual and old-fashioned methods to achieve one's goals. And the two gondolas about kind of different models from about 300 years apart, and obviously the people are deciding which one is the better one to use. Bitter battles I shall return to in a moment, whilst a true and perfect plot is concerned with how to choose between farming, forests and wildness, who loses everything and who gains the most. Divided Loyalties is about working out who is at the table, who should be at the table, how to stay at the table, and how to bring those people back who've been banished from the table. It concerns how to work out a plan for equality and to question what privilege is and who deserves what. Whilst predicting positions moves us into the realm of the cosmic again, asking how planets move around each other, and as Lubena comments, just because you invent a way of exploring doesn't mean you're entitled to own the cosmos. All the works, in one way or another then, are about sharing and the complexities and power struggles inherent in the possibilities of sharing. Who is in control, who wants control, and who seizes control, and what are the choices that are being made to get there. Across her oeuvre, the significance of having a plan or a strategy has always been central to Hamid's thinking. And in this new body of paintings, it becomes an explicit focus. The idea that when one makes strategic choices, they have consequences. And so choosing wisely, knowing whose advice to listen to, participating in debate and conversation, becomes an important aspect of the choices one makes. As she said in the past on multiple occasions and in different contexts, I am not a painter in the strictest sense. I am a political strategist who uses visual language to encourage conversation. In a reprise of one of her major paintings, 5, from the 1992 series Revenge, A Masque in 5 Tableaux, in which two women, Maud Salter and Lubena, sit at a table together arguing in a domestic interior that references the modernist styles of 1920s Paris. Each of the 10 new strategy paintings also depicts people gathered around a table. though now they are more anonymous men and women, strategizing about an array of either strange or familiar objects in front of them, learning how to make the best choices, knowing that whatever they decide will have serious political consequences, and not knowing who to trust, who to listen to, or how to make the best choices. As Jill Morgan noted in her discussion of Five over 30 years ago, different strategies are debated, the atmosphere is highly charged and reflected in the avant-garde yellow. Looking into the eyes of the flowers on the table, we see their Egyptian African depictions, so the yellow becomes a colour of Africa, an interior constructed in the manner of modernist painters, but with the fabric of Africa acknowledged. In the new strategy paintings, yellow still has an important role to play, as we shall see in a moment, as do flowers already indicated with Flora Britannica. But the context of the strategizing has shifted from the negrophilia of 1920s Paris in Five to the very specific context of the Texas state capitol, just a few blocks away from the Jones Center, and very much in Hinid's purview when thinking about and making this new body of work. One work that stands out in particular in relation to both the colour yellow and the context of making the work for display in Texas is Bitter Battles. And I just want to show you that work quickly. And I have a clip, it's about 5 minutes, of Lubena talking about this painting, which I also wanted to show you, because it's kind of genius how she pivots from talking about lemons to other things.
Bitter Lemons is one of the 10 paintings in my strategy series. I'm kind of particularly fond of it because the colours that I've used remind me of Matisse paintings. They remind me of the south of France. They remind me of a hot day with the sea outside and the kind of light flooding into the room. So kind of the sort of day that you might be sitting around, perhaps drinking something pleasant, eating something delicious and sweet, and talking about, I don't know, what you might do in the evening. But the two people at the table, sitting at a table that seems to be tipping in a kind of odd and slightly dangerous way, but only in a way that sometimes a Matisse table tips, or sometimes even I don't know, many painters, maybe even a Cézanne table tips in that way. But anyway, there's something kind of odd and familiar and unfamiliar about the space for me. There are two people. There's a chair that's clearly placed for someone to sit on, not in a comfortable way, but in a, how shall I say, in a kind of familiar way for somebody to be looking out of the window. I mean, it's very easy to sit in a chair and look out of the window and look at the sea all day long, if you don't mind being totally aware of the passing of time. If the passing of time is a frivolous thing for you, that's fine. If it marks something that you feel you don't have very much of, then it's quite particular and quite sometimes can be a bit alarming. Anyway, there's the empty chair. You can sit at the empty chair. You can sit at the tipping table with these two people. What they're trying to work out is what monuments are for. What purpose do they serve? Who should have them? Who should be celebrated or remembered? And it's a fantastically difficult question, because certainly all over the world, and I would say on all 5 continents, there are town squares, city squares, entrances to cities, entrances to villages even, that have a monument or a remembrance to something or someone. And in the making of this painting, I wanted to convey how challenging that is, but that it's something incredibly important that we all have to work out. What exactly are monuments for? The perfect object, it seems to me, to use to try to work out this problem is the lemon. Something absolutely thrilling about the color of a lemon, the shape of a lemon, the feel of a lemon, and amazingly, the sort of, I don't know, flexibility, diversity, multiple uses of the lemon. It's an extraordinary fruit. And so in the painting of this work, I collected the lemons on the table so that it seemed as if one protagonist had one set and another protagonist had another set. And that they were using these fruits to try to decide who should have monuments and who shouldn't. But as I played with the painting of the lemons, I'd already painted the room, I put the people and the table and the chair in the room, and at the last painted the lemons. I think I needed a way to be clearer, I suppose, that was what I was talking about. I made a kind of chance gesture with some charcoal that lifted one lemon from being flat and almost part of the table onto a little stand. And then I understood that one person was to have the lemons on stands, but that immediately meant that the other person had to have lemons that were, if you like, in cages or trapped somehow. Absolutely illustrating that if one set of people are on monuments, another set of people are probably incarcerated.
You can see why I wanted to show you this. It's that kind of pivot that she makes. It's extraordinary. The Texas state capitol, a few blocks from the Jones Center, where the exhibition is, serves as a seat of government for the state of Texas, and as such has responsibilities for state legislation and governance pertaining to law and criminality. A 2019 report by the American Vera Institute of Justice notes that, quote, since 1970, the rate of incarceration in America has expanded more than fourfold, and the United States leads the world in locking people up. They also note, somewhat unsurprisingly, that racial disparities in incarceration remain strikingly wide, and that women constitute a rising number of those behind bars. In Texas, black people constitute 30% of state residents, but 27% of people in jail and 33% of people in prison. And Texas ranks third nationally for prison admissions. Sobering statistics. The question of who gets remembered and who gets incarcerated continues to be sharply divided along racial lines, making for bitter battles indeed. What Himid achieves in her work across the decades in which she has been active, as what we can palpably call a modern history painter, I would suggest, is to deftly weave in and out of pleasure and pain by the medium of paint, the language of pattern and the application of colour, as she pivots, in this case, from lemons to monuments to incarceration in the blink of an eye. Whilst we are enticed by the visual allure of the vibrantly painted surfaces, we are caught up short by their political sucker punch of the tipping table, unsteady of the choices being made. Returning then finally to where I began, more or less, with the time is always now. I want to conclude with a brief consideration of Le Redress, The Exchange of 2016, one of the works currently on show at the NPG. The painting bestows richly reimagined lives to the unnamed and enslaved African people aboard the French slave ship Le Redress, translated as the Prowler, during a particularly horrific episode in the ship's history. On the 24th of January 1819, Le Redress departed Le Havre bound for West Africa to illegally pick up 162 enslaved Africans and transport them across the Middle Passage to the Caribbean islands of Guadeloupe, before returning to Le Havre on the 22nd of October the same year. During the ship's journey across the Middle Passage, an outbreak of the eye disease ophthalmia, for which there was no cure at the time, led to most of the crew and the enslaved Africans on board going either permanently or temporarily blind. As a result, in a chillingly common occurrence of the era, the captain made the choice to command that 36 of the enslaved people deemed to have permanently lost their sight should be thrown overboard so that he could claim the insurance money for lost cargo, a chillingly familiar story of the Middle Passage. As Himid has commented, I was struck by the horror of the incident, but also by the dread of losing sight, especially as a visual artist. In Le Redress, the exchange, I wasn't interested in describing this scene itself, but rather in describing that feeling of confusion, of not knowing exactly what is going on. In a way, I'm trying to convey the ghost of it all, the shudder in the room. Barbara Walker's ghostly imprints and Lubaina Himid's shudder in the room perhaps recall the desire of Benjamin's angel to awaken the dead and repair the ruins of our shared colonial and indeed entangled pasts. In Benjamin's terms, the yet site of Walker's, Kafar's, Johnson's and Himid's archival manoeuvres may brush the West's white-centric histories against the grain and create new narratives of revolutionary possibility for the reimagining of Black life. Perhaps we might even make the choice to embrace them as our new angels of history. Thank you.